it's almost a demand. Please have a respectfulness to anybody that stands up and asks a question. And let's give everybody a chance to participate in the dialogue. Can we all agree to that? Okay. So with that, those are the rules. State your name, you have 30 seconds. You may ask your question within 30 seconds. I'm going to work from down here to up there. We've probably got about 20 minutes that I'm going to do this. And then we're going to give the panel, you guys are going to need to grab your mics if you haven't. You're going to have the panel have 30 seconds dialogue with that question. All right? Perfect. You had your hand up first. If you would like to please make sure you hold it close enough.
Super, thank you. So I have 30 seconds to ask a question, but I have many questions at so many different levels. Scientifically, could you explain the pause? Are you familiar with the pause? Okay. So scientifically, I'm hearing science as a Christian from science who believes in evolution and denies creationism. I don't know if that's your particular stance, so I have skepticism in that science, especially when I read about things like the pause. I read about the false hockey stick narrative, that there's proof that was falsified. That's okay.
So if you can address two things, I think, John, that was probably directed more toward you. The pause and then the hockey stick by Dr. Michael Mann.
Yeah, so first of all, I'm happy to give
You got green.
Green's an hour. So, first of all, I did bring cards, and feel free to connect with me afterwards if we don't have time to answer all these questions. I'm happy to field questions later on if we don't get to those. The issue of the pause, some people have claimed that climate change or global warming stopped 15 years ago or 17 years ago, depending on who's making the claim. And the answer is we haven't observed a pause. I study ocean warming, and there's been absolutely no pause in ocean warming, and as Paul mentions, that's where over 90% of the heat goes. But then the question is, have the air temperatures warmed at a different rate? So to be clear, there has been no cessation of climate change. There's been no halt at all. So there's no validity to those arguments. It doesn't matter whose data you use. In fact, the Koch brothers funded their own study, and their study confirmed what NASA and NOAA are saying, that there's been no pause. I, along with a number of my colleagues, actually looked at the statistics of this, and we threw out 2014, which is a super hot year. We didn't include 2013, and we could not find any statistical evidence of a pause. And in August, a climate researcher took the temperature data, sent it to, I think it was 90 economists, and what they did was they took a snippet of this so-called pause, but wherever they found the words climate or temperatures, they put corn prices. And they sent the data to commodity experts, and the commodity experts said not only is our corn prices continuing to go up, but they actually called claims that there was a pause fraudulent. So this was a blinded study. So the public conversations are very confusing because you hear claims and counterclaims. And so if you want more detail, I'd be happy to share offline afterwards. But there has been no cessation of global warming.
Thank you. Next question.
Hi, and initially I want to thank you all for speaking. So many environmentally sustainable solutions that we must make are initially more expensive. And how do we justify this to the poorest of the poor, to the single mothers who are just struggling to make ends meet? How do we justify it?
I can also help with that one once you guys are done.
Sure. I think a lot of that has to do with our imagination of how we're understanding sustainability. And I want to name that a lot of the discourse around sustainability is defined by generally middle-class, educated white people. And so when the technology for sustainability is defined by that group of people, then of course it's going to be hard for other groups of people to be able to access that. But I also think that there's a way that we can insist on pro-people solutions that drives innovation and creativity. And so in North Minneapolis, Shiloh Temple, which is one of the cornerstone African American congregations in North Minneapolis, decided to put solar panels on their roof, and they're creating a community solar garden, which means that people can buy a plot of the solar panels as if it were a community garden and people were buying plots to grow vegetables. And they did the math. This is a collaboration of a lot of environmentalists that I can connect you to if you're interested. But they did the math and they figured out that this form of energy distribution is cheaper than what Xcel was offering to the residents in North Minneapolis. And so I just think that's a prime example of how if we insist on having accessibility to lots of different types of folks, we can think of creative solutions. We're human beings, that's what we do. And so even for something like solar panels. So.
And I think also, just in terms of policy, I've been involved in discussions with various federally elected officials. There is the ability through policy to ensure that the poor are not impacted by any potential price increase of making a move to clean energy. And that is something that is top of mind from Republicans all the way through to Democrats. Thank you for the question.
Max Richter, pastor of Community United Methodist Church, proud colleague of Tyler and Sarah. Yay. My question for you as spiritual community leaders, for all of us, this is huge and vitally important work. How is it as spiritual leaders that you sustain yourself? What spiritual disciplines do you recommend in your own personal practices?
Take a walk in the woods.
I do a lot of walking too, but I've been trying for the last 4 years to really get Sabbath done well, and I'm happy to say just last year I figured it out. It is wonderful, the idea of taking an entire day of prayer, reading, of walking. I've been doing a lot of walking recently. And a part of that, I've lost over 70 pounds. But I also want to just sort of say a little, I think you've heard a little bit of it, the unity part of it too is, another thing I want us to also think about, and I was talking about that story, is that this is a communal effort. Our religious life has taken some strange lessons from our economy and our politics. And one of the, I think, sad lessons we've kind of taken from our economy and our politics is that we are individuals in that everything has to be looked at in terms of our own liberty and freedom. I'm a believer in those values of liberty and freedom of our civic lives, but the life of faith is a communal enterprise. We discern together how to be people of God. And so what you're talking about, even this work and the work that we're doing and this task before us is going to require us to come together as people of God, to discern together. There are some hard decisions that have to be made, and all of the interests have to be brought in. Some people accuse us of trying to take business out of this. No. This discussion cannot happen without our businesses, our leaders, our government, our churches, our cultures, everybody coming together and talking about this together. So even this work, as difficult it is, if we recapture this notion of a community, especially people of faith as a community, it can be much more easily tackled if you're not doing it alone.
I think there's nothing more draining for a faith leader or anyone to see a problem, feel strongly about it, and feel powerless and not do anything about it. It's just exhausting and draining. And so I think taking some meaningful action with others. In the church I used to serve at, I was feeling so overwhelmed by all this and trying to motivate people from the pulpit, that type of thing, and finally I said, you know what, I don't have to get all 2,000 people in my congregation doing this. I put together a group of 8 people who wanted to do something, and within a couple of years, we had done a variety of projects, including a 40 kilowatt solar panel system on our school. It takes a small group of people that are motivated and committed to get something done, and boy, you feel so much better. So, that type of thing.
Thank you very much. Next question.
Hi, I'm Dan Trujano. I'm part of the Shepherd Lake Lutheran Church, and I appreciate all of you coming down here today to speak with many of you who are here today. My hope is that with your talent and your ability to articulate this really important issue, is that you not only speak to a group of 300, that some of you actually get out there broader and maybe on like a TED Talk and speak to millions of people and get millions of hits on something like that. But my question is actually around what can we, as ordinary citizens, who maybe don't have the talent that you have to articulate this matter, where can we donate our time, our talents, and our treasures? What organizations would you recommend for us to think about donating time and treasure to?
I think the most important thing you can do is talk to your network, talk to your friends, family, and tell them how important this is to you and why they should see this as important. Networking, sharing information, not just the scientific facts, but the implications. For me, I see a fundamental injustice. And, Christ talked about faith, Christ talked about justice. And we are now putting the interests of habitual polluters, corporate polluters, ahead of the common good, ahead of your kids and their kids and generations of unborn to come. For me, that represents a fundamental injustice. As a PS, fossil fuels brought us to this point. We are all hypocrites when we criticize or demonize fossil fuels. It's like we've all smoked 3 packs a day for the last 300 years, and now the Surgeon General is saying, this isn't sustainable. And so we're all having sort of that aha moment. But there's another narrative out there, and I would just caution your friends and family about conspiracy theories. I think conspiracy theories are intellectually lazy. It's a lot easier. And psychologists say if there's a problem for which there is no obvious solution, we're hardwired to ignore or deny. It's just the way we're wired. And when people say, well, Paul, maybe Noah's cooking the books. Maybe these thousands of scientists are in cahoots. Maybe this is all just a way to tee up a liberal agenda. And I say, now think about that. Thousands of scientists worldwide, every major scientific organization on the planet, they're all somehow perpetuating a conspiracy that the government is somehow endorsing. Our government can't even launch a website. So I'm a little skeptical when people talk about a global conspiracy. Whose interest is that furthering? Which narrative is that furthering? What's in the best interest of your kids and their kids to come? What is going to benefit the common good? The best thing you can do, I think, talk about this in your network, expand your network, keep a global perspective, and let's try to elect politicians who still have a respect for science. You can be a person of faith, you can believe in a higher power. Science, again, as I mentioned, it's essential, but it's incomplete. And that's why we're here today at church, because we all acknowledge that science is incomplete, but we ignore the scientists at our own peril.
Perfect. Thank you. Next question.
Thanks for being here, panel. One thing I look at is world population, and the USA population has doubled since 1968, and so has the world population to 7 billion. And I see a direct correlation, population to climate change. You listed 23 religions. If you were able to convince all those religions to not overpopulate, zero population growth, 2 kids maximum, hopefully, I think that would have a big impact on climate change. I'd just like to hear your comments.
I guess I have a fundamental disagreement with you on that, in that I really believe if you look at the data and you listen to what, you know, experts like even Al Gore, who's been a little bit demonized here today, say it's not about population, it's about consumption. We have more than enough resources in this world for everyone who's here and more to come if we shared those resources fairly and evenly. The example I gave about how much gasoline the US consumes compared to the next 24 countries, more than them combined. And we are a fraction, a tiny fraction of the world's population. That's the self-sacrificial love aspect that has to come into this. We have to look at what are we doing as a society. Not only us, but other developed countries. 20% of the world's population uses 90+% of the world's resources. That's the imbalance. It's not about simple population numbers, it's about consumption. And I appreciated what Sarah and others said about, we are resurrection people. There's these 3 crosses embedded into the back of the sanctuary here. Christ, of course, is on the center one. He took the sacrifice for us all. But there's 2 other crosses. Those were thieves. In some ways, we are, as the developed world, the thieves taking from the rest of the world right now by our rampant consumption. And so Christ says, get up on these crosses with me. Change your lifestyle, your culture, your society, self-sacrifice, and then we will all rise together.
My concern with a focus specifically on the population growth as opposed to consumption is that if that focus becomes the center of our mitigation efforts, it's going to fall largely disproportionately on the poorer developing countries. And I think as the richer developed world should take the lead also of looking at, I think it was, I don't know which one, it was John or Paul had the ways of dealing with it, dealing with what we can do now. It is the developed countries, the wealthier nations that can take the lead on helping the developing countries mitigate and change their consumption habits. So if we all get that piece together, the population issues won't be the driving force of our public policy, but it would be how do we get at consumption. What we've seen in China, in India, is as development and as industry grows, the consumption increases. That's what we know. It's not so much that they have what their population is doing, is that as they get wealthier, they start patterning after the wealthier nations in their consumption. And that's where we need to take the lead on how do we change our consumption here, our influence on the rest of the world so that we can impact how other people choose to consume.
Thank you. Next question, please.
Hi, my name is Phil Hall. I'm a member of the congregation here at this church. Again, I'm an engineer, so when I look at things like, the population's doubled in my lifetime. And, for those of you who work with younger people, the population will double again in their lifetime. But I've looked at some of these issues like consumption and resources, and I'm pretty convinced that the world has adequate resources if we take care of them for a population of 60 billion people. But a question is, if I have solutions for some of those resource problems, is there actually any organizations out there or amongst the younger people, interest groups that would be interested in pursuing solutions. And I'd like to kind of address that primarily to Dr. Abraham, because he works with younger people. Do you see any interest in the younger people for solutions to these problems?
The interest is insatiable, actually. What's nice is the industry is coming up with solutions and wanting to hire our young, smart, passionate students. So I teach engineering at the undergraduate and graduate level, and many of our students are going out and getting jobs in the clean, renewable, new energy sector. You know, we've had a variety of revolutions. I was talking to Paul before we started today, and my kids, when they go up to my laptop, I don't have one of these new laptops, but I've got the old kind with the keyboard. And so my kids will go up to my laptop and touch it. And we've all experienced this. You know, they'll go up to the TV, Dad, why can't... And you think about it, I remember when I saw my first iPhone. And it wasn't that long ago. And the analogy is we are rapidly moving to a new energy economy. And the young people want to be part of that because A, they want a job, B, they want to make the world a better place. And I do a lot of work with international partners, especially in China, and it is a mad scramble between the US and China. We have international agreements to reduce pollution, and they're really remarkable, but China is eating our lunch in the solar power industry. They're killing us. And our young people want to be, we want to sell our technology to the rest of the world rather than buy it. So there's a lot of interest from young people. Now, there aren't enough avenues for them, but there is a lot of interest, and there are quite a few avenues.
If I could jump in there too, I do think that in terms of just the idea of taxing carbon begins to incentivize behavior. And I, just speaking from all the kids we all interact with who are now in their 20s, they are giving themselves away. I mean, the amount of young people I know that are giving a year or two of service out in the world speak to the heart of that generation. And I think that somewhere the economy does have to get geared in such a way that there is an incentive to create entry-level jobs for that generation of people designed to solve the issues we've talked about today. But they're ready to step up for it. They just need places.
Yeah, and if I want to add something about the solutions, I generally don't go talk about solutions. I generally talk about where we are with respect to climate change. But you can have solutions which are equitable and which reward good behavior. Tax, one of the most popular things right now is a tax and dividend. Now, tax and dividend means things that are carbon intensive would cost more. There's a tax. But then that tax is immediately returned back to the population, so it's a zero net sum. So January 1, everyone will get a $2,000 check. And then if you make smart decisions throughout the year and you purchase things that are less carbon intensive, by the end of the year, you'll actually have money left over. If you make poor decisions and you buy things that are carbon intensive, at the end of the year, you will have spent more than that $2,000. So in a certain sense, it's a zero net, but it's a tax of the poor choosers to the smart decision makers, and that's a way to incentivize good behavior.
The thing that John's talking about right there is actually supported by Ronald Reagan's Secretary of State, George Shultz. He advocates for that heavily, that approach. That's one approach that's being talked about. Bob Inglis was a congressional, very conservative Republican from South Carolina. He advocates for a similar type of thing, but a different mechanism as opposed to the dividend. So, question?
Hello, this is Sean Krzyzewski with the Alliance for Sustainability, and just wanted to have you mention our state's goal of reducing carbon by 80%, which has now been also endorsed by the Met Council in their Thrive MSP 2040 vision, and you can actually have your city council create an action plan for climate reduction on your own city level, because cities will be redoing their comp plans over the next 2 years. So just mention that our state is actually committed to this goal.
Last question.
The question was asked about what we can do, and I think one of the best places to start is is look at your bills, look at your electric bill, and then go to the EPA carbon website. If you go to the EPA, you can translate kilowatt hours into carbon. And it also gives you equivalencies. And so maybe you set a goal. We did this at Oak Grove Presbyterian Church. I'm John Crampton, I'm the chair of the Green Committee. And we looked at our electric bill, and we were consuming 130,000 kilowatt hours of electricity. My question is, actually it's more of a comment, is that, that's the way to start. And then think of collective actions. What we're doing is we are initiating a community solar garden where we're going to provide all of our electricity and also up to 100 members for 5 to 10% less than they're paying Xcel.
I'm going to ask the last one, if I can find it here. I wrote it down because it was actually quite good. And it's directed I didn't find it. It was actually came from the Catholic Church. And I'm going to direct it at the 5 faith leaders that are on the panel. How does the Eucharist inspire and motivate our concern for the environment? How should Sunday worship impact weekday witness?
I'll go first. In terms of moments, so we each can look at our faith traditions and see moments that were decisive and changed how we thought about the church, how we thought about our world. Coming from a Protestant reformational background, this is that kind of moment now. I think people in our congregations are looking for ways to connect their faith to their everyday life. That's why a lot of folks aren't in church, because they've kind of given up on that ever really happening. And I think this is one of those issues where we can engage faith in everybody's actual life and future in a tangible, real way that they can act upon. And I think that's a defining moment in the history of the church right now.
First of all, for me, nothing tastes better than bread and juice. We drink juice in the United Methodist Church. Throw a little butter on that, there's nothing better. For me, when we hold the bread, it's the body of Christ. And when we hold the body of Christ, we hold the whole body, not just the parts that we like. We hold not the parts that just get along with us. We hold the people who came before us, and also we hold the people who will come after us. And that's a gift and a task.
In Metropolitan Community Churches, our weekly Eucharist is about remembering and renewal. And that's to remember who and whose we are, and renewed, equipped to go out and serve. And so it's very much connected to this, that we remember who we are and whose we are. And we remember that we are equipped by being fed to go out and serve others.
I want to add that one of the points of the Eucharist is to remember that Jesus was incarnated. Jesus became a human being, not just kind of like a spiritual angel who washed down and then got whisked away. And if we remember that from actually grasping real bread and dipping it in real wine or juice and putting it into our bodies, and it becomes our physical entity. And so that's why Eucharist is really important for New City Church, but we also see our life as a church plant as an act of incarnation. We see God newly creating things within our own organization, but also within our neighborhood. And so I think that church planting is one of the golden threads of hope as we move forward in the church, because it allows for so much innovation. So I submit that to your consideration too.
I think the Eucharist is what's talked about in here. It's a perfect symbol of the unity that I was talking about earlier. God gives us the gift of creation. From creation comes forth grapes and wheat, and then humans take God's gift of wheat and grapes and turn it in through human work into juice or wine. and bread, and then we offer that back to God, who gives it right back to us again to share with all. So it's the perfect symbol of the unity that God wants for us all, with God, with each other, with creation.
Excellent. Thank you very much. A round of applause for our panel, please. You guys, please feel free to, if you want to sit here, you may. If you want to sit back down there, Pastor Dan and I are going to close this out. I'm actually going to run, I'm big into video clips, and so I'm going to try to run here if I can make it go. I'm going to run a quick 3-minute video clip, and then Dan and I will wrap this up.